The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Captain Marcus Williams stood watching the newest batch of recruits fumble through their training exercises. At 52, Marcus had served the royal family for over 3 decades, his weathered face telling stories of countless ceremonies, state visits, and moments of both triumph and sorrow. His uniform, pristine as always, bore the distinguished medals of a man who had dedicated his entire adult life to protecting those who wore the crown. The recruits were young, some barely out of their teens, with eager faces and nervous energy that reminded Marcus of his own early days in service. They moved through their drills with the awkward precision of soldiers still learning their place in the grand machinery of royal protocol. Their boots clicked against the ancient stone, creating an uneven rhythm that spoke of inexperience and determination in equal measure. Marcus had trained hundreds of guards over the years, watching wide-eyed youngsters transform into the silent, vigilant protectors that stood behind the royal family at every public appearance. He knew the weight of responsibility that would eventually settle on their shoulders, the way it would change how they saw the world, how they carried themselves, how they understood their purpose in life. This particular group had arrived just 2 weeks ago, fresh from the military academy with their heads full of textbook knowledge and their hearts full of ambition. They came from different backgrounds, some from military families, others from small towns where serving the crown was considered the highest honor a young person could achieve. Each carried their own dreams of what it meant to be part of the royal guard. Most of them romanticized notions that would be slowly replaced by the reality of long hours, constant vigilance, and the profound responsibility of protecting lives that belonged not just to individuals, but to the entire nation. Among the recruits, Marcus had already begun to identify the natural leaders, the ones who showed promise, and those who might struggle with the demands of royal service. There was Thompson, barely 19, whose father had served before him. Jenkins, a quiet girl from Wales whose steady hands and sharp eyes marked her as exceptional. Rodriguez, whose family had immigrated 2 generations ago, and who saw his service as the ultimate expression of gratitude to his adopted homeland. As Marcus observed their morning exercises, he noticed something that made him pause. The recruits had formed their usual training circle, but their attention kept drifting toward the palace windows. Word had spread through the ranks that Prince George was expected to make an appearance today, though no official announcement had been made. The young prince, now in his early 20s, had recently returned from university and was beginning to take on more official duties. The relationship between the royal family and their guards was complex, built on traditions that stretched back centuries yet constantly evolving with the times. Marcus remembered when Prince George was just a child, occasionally glimpsing him during family events or catching sight of him playing in the palace gardens. Now the prince was a young man, and the dynamic would be different. These new recruits would be part of his protection detail, sworn to place his life above their own without question. Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with training new guards. It wasn't just about teaching them to march in formation or stand at attention for hours without moving. He had to help them understand what it truly meant to serve, to be part of something larger than themselves, to carry forward traditions that had protected the monarchy through wars, scandals, celebrations, and the countless quiet moments that made up royal life. The morning air was crisp, typical for early autumn, and Marcus could see his breath as he called out corrections to the recruits. Their movements were improving, slowly but steadily, and he felt the familiar satisfaction that came with watching young people grow into their roles. Some would excel quickly, others would need more time, and unfortunately, a few would realize that royal service wasn't for them and would quietly request transfers to other military units. As the training session continued, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different somehow. Perhaps it was the way the palace staff moved with slightly more purpose than usual, or the fact that additional security personnel had been quietly positioned around the grounds. Something was building toward a moment that would test not just the recruits' training, but their character and their understanding of what it truly meant to serve the crown. The training session was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps echoing through the corridor that connected the palace to the courtyard. Marcus immediately recognized the measured pace of senior palace staff, and his instincts, honed by decades of service, told him that something significant was about to happen. He raised his hand, bringing the recruits to immediate attention, their conversations dying away as they sensed the shift in atmosphere. Private Secretary Jonathan Hartwell emerged from the shadowed doorway, his expression grave and purposeful. Hartwell had worked with Marcus on countless occasions, and the captain could read the tension in the man's usually composed demeanor. Behind him followed several members of the royal household staff, their presence indicating that whatever was unfolding involved the royal family directly. "Captain Williams," Hartwell addressed him with the formal tone reserved for official business. "We have a situation that requires immediate attention. Prince George has requested to address your training group personally. This is not a scheduled visit, and given the circumstances, we need your full cooperation." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Unscheduled visits from members of the royal family, especially when described as addressing a situation, typically meant something had gone wrong or was about to go wrong. He glanced at his recruits, who stood frozen in formation, their eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. None of them had expected their routine training day to involve a direct encounter with the prince they had sworn to protect. "What kind of situation are we dealing with, sir?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice low enough that the recruits couldn't overhear. Years of experience had taught him that information was crucial in these moments, and the safety of both the prince and his men might depend on understanding exactly what they were facing. Hartwell's expression grew even more serious. "There have been some concerning developments regarding security protocols. Nothing immediately dangerous, but Prince George has specifically requested to speak with the newest members of the Guard. He wants them to understand something important about their role, something that apparently can't wait for the usual formal introduction ceremony." The implications of Hartwell's words settled over Marcus like a heavy cloak. Security concerns involving new recruits could mean many things, none of them particularly comforting. Had there been a breach in protocol? Had someone questioned the loyalty or competence of his trainees? Or was this about something more serious, something that threatened not just the security of the royal family, but the very foundations of their service? Marcus turned back to his recruits, studying their faces with new intensity. Thompson stood slightly straighter than the others, his military bearing evident even in his nervousness. Jenkins maintained her characteristic calm, though Marcus could see the questions in her eyes. Rodriguez looked like he might actually be holding his breath, overwhelmed by the gravity of the moment. These young men and women had entered royal service with dreams of honor and duty, but they were about to face their first real test of what those concepts actually meant in practice. Marcus had seen this moment many times before, the transition from theoretical service to the raw reality of protecting people whose lives were constantly scrutinized, threatened, and politicized by forces far beyond anything most people could imagine. "Form up in presentation order," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades of experience. The recruits moved with the precision they had been drilling, but Marcus could sense their underlying tension. This wasn't a training exercise anymore. This was real, and everything they had learned about protocol and proper behavior was about to be put to the test in front of the prince himself. As they arranged themselves in perfect formation, Marcus felt a familiar mixture of pride and concern. Pride in how quickly they had responded to the unexpected situation, and concern about what Prince George felt compelled to tell them that couldn't wait for a more formal occasion. The young prince had always been thoughtful and serious about his responsibilities, but for him to request an immediate meeting with new recruits suggested something significant was weighing on his mind. The courtyard fell silent except for the distant sounds of palace life continuing around them. Staff members moved quietly into position, creating the subtle security perimeter that always surrounded royal appearances, even informal ones. Marcus checked his watch and realized that in just a few minutes, these recruits would be facing their first real moment of service, a moment that would likely shape their understanding of what it meant to be guardians of the crown. Whatever Prince George had to tell them, Marcus knew it would be something these young people would remember for the rest of their careers. The question that troubled him was whether they were ready for whatever truth the prince felt compelled to share with them, and whether their training had prepared them not just for the formalities of service, but for the deeper realities of what protecting the royal family actually required. Prince George appeared in the doorway with the quiet confidence that had been instilled in him from childhood, but Marcus immediately noticed something different about his demeanor. The prince's usual composed smile was absent, replaced by an expression of genuine concern that seemed to weigh heavily on his young shoulders. At 23, Prince George carried himself with the dignity expected of his position. Yet today there was something more human, more vulnerable in his bearing that caught Marcus off guard. The recruits snapped to attention with military precision, their backs straight and eyes fixed forward, but Marcus could sense their collective nervousness. This was their first encounter with a member of the royal family in an official capacity, and the weight of the moment was palpable in the crisp autumn air. Prince George approached slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, studying each face in the formation with the careful attention of someone who understood that these individuals would potentially risk their lives for his protection. "At ease," Prince George said quietly, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard. The recruits relaxed slightly, though their attention remained focused entirely on him. Marcus noticed that the prince's usual formal speech patterns seemed more relaxed, as if he had made a conscious decision to speak to them as real people rather than simply as members of his security detail. "I asked to speak with you today because something has happened that I believe you need to understand," Prince George began, pacing slowly in front of the formation. "Yesterday we received intelligence about a planned security incident. Nothing that poses immediate danger to anyone here, but something that has made me realize that you deserve to know exactly what you're signing up for when you agree to serve as royal guards." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Security incidents involving new recruits were always concerning, but the prince's tone suggested this was about more than just protocol or procedure. This was about the fundamental nature of royal service, about the reality that these young people would face as they took on the responsibility of protecting not just individuals, but symbols of national identity and continuity. "The intelligence suggests that someone has been attempting to identify and approach new members of the Royal Guard," Prince George continued, his voice growing more serious. "Not to harm them, but to test their loyalty, to see if they can be influenced or compromised in ways that might eventually pose a threat to royal security. This isn't uncommon, unfortunately, but it's something I want you to hear about directly, from me rather than discovering it through rumors or briefings from security personnel." The implications of the prince's words settled over the courtyard like a heavy silence. Marcus watched as the recruits processed what they were hearing, their faces showing the gradual realization that their service would involve more than ceremonial duties and protective protocols. They were entering a world where their loyalty would be constantly tested, where their personal lives would be scrutinized, and where the price of failure could extend far beyond their own careers. Thompson's jaw tightened slightly, suggesting he was thinking about what this might mean for his family, given his father's previous service. Jenkins maintained her steady composure, but Marcus could see her mind working through the practical implications of what the prince was telling them. Rodriguez looked stunned, as if the reality of royal service was suddenly becoming much more complex than anything he had imagined. "Want each of you to understand that serving as a royal guard means accepting that your life will change in ways you might not have anticipated," Prince George said, stopping directly in front of the formation and making eye contact with each recruit in turn. "You will be watched, evaluated, and sometimes approached by people who don't have our best interests at heart. Your families may be scrutinized. Your friends may be questioned about your character and your beliefs." Marcus appreciated the prince's directness, even as he worried about how these young recruits would handle such stark honesty so early in their service. Most new guards discovered these realities gradually, through experience and careful guidance from their senior officers. Prince George was choosing to lay it all out immediately, treating them as adults capable of making informed decisions about their commitment to royal service. "The question I need each of you to ask yourselves," Prince George continued, "is whether you're prepared for that level of scrutiny and responsibility. Whether you understand that protecting the crown means protecting something much larger than any individual person, including myself. Whether you're ready to maintain your integrity and loyalty, even when it becomes difficult or uncomfortable." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of London traffic and the gentle rustling of autumn leaves in the palace gardens. Marcus could see that each recruit was grappling with the weight of the prince's words, understanding for perhaps the first time that their oath of service carried implications that extended far beyond what they had learned in training exercises and protocol manuals. As Prince George's words hung in the air, Marcus noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the courtyard. What had begun as a routine training session had transformed into something much more significant. a moment that would define these recruits' understanding of their service for years to come. The prince seemed to sense this too, his expression growing even more thoughtful as he studied the faces before him. "I know this isn't what you expected to hear during your second week of service," Prince George said, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there at the beginning of his address. "Most guards don't learn about these aspects of royal protection until they've been in service for months or even years. But recent events have convinced me that you deserve to know the full scope of what you're committing to." Marcus watched Thompson's reaction carefully. The young man's father had never mentioned these particular challenges during his own service, and Marcus could see the recruit wrestling with the disconnect between his family's stories of honor and ceremony and the reality the prince was describing. It was a common experience for second-generation guards, this moment when the romanticized version of royal service gave way to its more complex truths. Jenkins stepped forward slightly, not breaking formation but indicating she had something to say. Prince George noticed immediately and nodded for her to speak. "Your Highness," she said, her Welsh accent soft but clear, "are you telling us this because you want us to reconsider our service, or because you want us to be better prepared for what's coming?" It was exactly the right question, Marcus thought, and it demonstrated the kind of practical intelligence that had marked Jenkins as exceptional from her first day of training. Prince George smiled for the first time since arriving in the courtyard, and Marcus could see genuine approval in his expression. "The latter. Absolutely," Prince George replied without hesitation. "I'm not trying to discourage anyone from serving. What I'm trying to do is ensure that your service is based on a complete understanding of what it entails. Too many good people have left the Royal Guard because they felt they hadn't been properly prepared for the realities of the position. I don't want that to happen to any of you." Rodriguez raised his hand tentatively, and Prince George nodded for him to speak. "Sir, when you say people have tried to approach guards, what exactly does that mean? Are we talking about bribes or threats or something else?" Marcus felt a surge of pride at the question. Rodriguez was thinking like a protector already, focusing on the practical details that would help him recognize and respond to potential threats. It was exactly the kind of mindset that made for effective royal guards. "All of those things, unfortunately," Prince George answered honestly. "Sometimes it's financial offers, sometimes it's threats against family members, sometimes it's more subtle approaches that start as friendships or romantic relationships. The people who want to compromise royal security are creative and patient, and they understand that guards are human beings with normal desires and vulnerabilities." The weight of this revelation settled over the recruits like a physical presence. Marcus could see them beginning to understand that their service would require not just physical courage and professional competence, but a level of personal vigilance that most people never had to maintain. They would need to question the motives of new acquaintances, be cautious about romantic relationships, and always consider whether someone's interest in them was genuine or connected to their access to the royal family. "I want to be clear about something," Prince George continued, his tone becoming more formal again. "The royal family doesn't expect you to live in isolation or to sacrifice your personal happiness for your service. What we do expect is that you'll be thoughtful about your relationships and honest with your supervisors if you ever find yourself in a situation that might pose a security concern. Captain Williams and his team are there to help you navigate these challenges, not to judge you for having a normal life outside your duties." Marcus appreciated the prince's acknowledgement of his role in supporting the guards. One of the most difficult aspects of training new recruits was helping them understand that seeking guidance wasn't a sign of weakness, but a demonstration of professional responsibility. Too many promising guards had made preventable mistakes because they were afraid to ask for help when they encountered situations they couldn't handle alone. "There's something else I want you to understand," Prince George said, his voice taking on a quality that Marcus recognized as the tone he used for his most serious pronouncements. "The intelligence we received yesterday suggests that whoever is targeting new guards has been studying our recruitment and training processes. They know things about your backgrounds, your families, your reasons for seeking royal service. This means that your period of greatest vulnerability may be right now, while you're still adjusting to your new roles and before you've fully learned to recognize potential threats." The gravity of Prince George's final statement seemed to crystallize everything that had been building throughout his address. Marcus felt the familiar surge of protective instinct that had driven his 3 decades of service, but now it was focused not just on the royal family, but on these young recruits who were suddenly facing threats they hadn't been trained to recognize or counter. What this means in practical terms, Prince George continued, is that for the next several weeks, you'll be under enhanced observation and protection, not because we don't trust you, but because we want to ensure that if anyone does attempt to approach or influence you, we can identify and stop them before any real damage is done. Marcus could see the recruits exchanging glances, their earlier nervousness now mixed with something deeper. They were beginning to understand that they weren't just soldiers in training anymore. They were potential targets in a complex game of security and counter-security that most people never knew existed. The weight of this realization was visible in their postures, the way they held themselves slightly differently than they had just minutes before. Thompson spoke up again, his voice steady despite the obvious tension he was feeling. "Your Highness, does this mean our families are at risk as well? My father served for 20 years and he's never mentioned anything like this." Prince George's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "Your families aren't in immediate danger, but they may be contacted by people claiming to be researchers, journalists, or even old friends trying to gather information about you. We've already taken steps to brief your immediate family members about what to watch for, and they'll have direct contact information for royal security if anything concerns them." Marcus made a mental note to follow up with each recruit about their family situations. The families of royal guards often struggled with the security requirements and lifestyle changes that came with their loved ones' service, and providing proper support during this transition period was crucial for both the guards' effectiveness and their personal well-being. Jenkins raised her hand again, and Marcus could see the wheels turning in her mind. "Sir, you mentioned that this intelligence came yesterday. Does that mean there's something specific we should be watching for? Or someone in particular who might approach us?" "That's an excellent question," Prince George replied, and Marcus could hear genuine respect in his voice. "The intelligence is still being analyzed, but what we know so far suggests that the approaches may come through social media, dating apps, or even seemingly accidental encounters in places where you spend your off-duty time. The key thing to remember is that legitimate approaches from the public are almost always formal and go through official channels. Anyone who approaches you directly about your service, especially if they ask questions about schedules, procedures, or royal family activities, should be reported immediately." Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "So essentially, we need to be suspicious of anyone who shows unusual interest in our work or seems to know more about royal protocols than a normal citizen would." "Exactly," Prince George confirmed. "And I want to emphasize that this doesn't mean you should become paranoid or isolated. What it means is that you should trust your instincts and never hesitate to seek guidance if something feels wrong. Captain Williams has dealt with these situations many times before, and the Royal Security Team has protocols in place to investigate and handle potential threats without disrupting your ability to do your job or live your life." Marcus felt a surge of appreciation for the prince's handling of this difficult conversation. By being direct about the threats while also providing clear guidance and reassurance, Prince George was demonstrating the kind of leadership that made royal guards willing to dedicate their careers to protective service. The recruits needed to understand the dangers, but they also needed to feel supported and prepared to handle whatever challenges might arise. "There's one more thing I want to share with you," Prince George said, his tone becoming more personal again. "I know that learning about these security concerns so early in your service might make you question whether royal guard duty is right for you. If any of you decide that this isn't what you want, there will be no shame in requesting a transfer to other military units. Your worth as soldiers and as people isn't defined by whether you're cut out for the specific challenges of royal protection." The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses in the conversation. This wasn't the silence of shock or confusion, but of genuine consideration. Marcus could see each recruit weighing what they had learned against their original motivations for seeking royal service, trying to determine whether they were prepared for the reality of what lay ahead. As the weight of Prince George's offer settled over the courtyard, Marcus watched each recruit's face carefully, reading the complex mix of emotions that played across their features. This was the moment that separated those who were truly committed to royal service from those who had been attracted by the ceremony and prestige without fully understanding the personal cost. Thompson was the first to respond, stepping forward with the measured pace that Marcus had noticed marked him as a natural leader. "Your Highness," he said, his voice clear and firm, I appreciate your honesty about what we're facing. My father always told me that real service meant accepting responsibilities that others couldn't or wouldn't take on. What you've described doesn't change my commitment. It just helps me understand what that commitment actually means. Marcus felt a surge of pride and relief. Thompson's response showed exactly the kind of maturity and perspective that made for exceptional royal guards. The young man understood that service wasn't about personal glory or even personal safety, but about accepting a role that was larger and more complex than any individual. Jenkins spoke next, her Welsh accent carrying a note of determination that Marcus had come to associate with her quiet strength. Sir, I joined the Royal Guard because I believe in what the monarchy represents for our country. Learning about these security challenges makes me more committed, not less. I want to be part of protecting something that matters, even if it means my life becomes more complicated. Rodriguez took a moment longer to formulate his response. But when he spoke, his words carried the weight of careful consideration. Your Highness, my family came to this country because they believed in the opportunities it could provide. Serving as a Royal Guard feels like the ultimate expression of gratitude for what Britain has given us. I'm not going to let some unknown threats change that. One by one, the other recruits stepped forward to express their continued commitment to royal service. Some spoke about family traditions, others about personal convictions, and a few simply stated their determination to see their training through to completion. Marcus noticed that none of them seemed to be speaking from bravado or false courage. Rather, their responses reflected genuine understanding of what they were choosing. Prince George listened to each statement with careful attention, nodding thoughtfully at each recruit's words. When the last of them had spoken, he spent a long moment studying their faces before responding. I'm impressed by your responses, and I'm grateful for your continued commitment. What you've demonstrated today is exactly the kind of thoughtfulness and integrity that royal service requires. Marcus could see that the prince was genuinely moved by the recruits' responses. This wasn't just a formal exchange of commitments. It was a moment of real connection between the person these guards would protect and the individuals who had chosen to dedicate their careers to that protection. Now that we've addressed the security concerns, Prince George continued, I want to talk about what happens next. Your training will continue as scheduled, but with some additional components focused on recognizing and responding to the kinds of approaches we've discussed. Captain Williams will be working with the security team to develop scenarios and exercises that will help you practice identifying potential threats while maintaining your normal activities. Marcus made mental notes about the training modifications that would need to be implemented. The recruits would need to learn skills that went beyond traditional military or security training, developing the kind of social awareness and personal vigilance that would protect them from manipulation without making them paranoid or antisocial. You'll also be assigned senior guards as mentors, Prince George added. These are experienced members of the Royal Protection Team who have dealt with various security challenges during their careers. They'll be available to answer questions, provide guidance, and help you navigate any situations that concern you. This mentorship program has been incredibly effective in helping new guards adjust to the realities of royal service. The mention of mentorship seemed to visibly relax several of the recruits. Marcus knew from experience that one of the most challenging aspects of Royal Guard duty was the sense of isolation that could develop when guards felt they couldn't discuss their concerns with anyone outside the service. Having experienced mentors available would provide crucial emotional and practical support during the vulnerable early months of their careers. Finally, Prince George said, his tone becoming more formal again, I want to establish a direct communication channel between myself and this training group. Captain Williams will provide you with a secure contact method that you can use if you ever need to bring concerns directly to my attention. This is unusual, but given the circumstances surrounding your class, I believe it's necessary. Marcus felt a moment of surprise at this announcement. Direct communication between recruits and members of the royal family was virtually unprecedented, reflecting just how seriously Prince George was taking the security threats that had prompted this entire conversation. It also demonstrated a level of personal investment in these guards' success that spoke well of the prince's character and his understanding of leadership. As Prince George concluded his address, the atmosphere in the courtyard had transformed completely from what it had been at the start of the morning's training session. What began as routine military exercises had become a defining moment that would shape these recruits' entire understanding of their service and their relationship with the royal family they had sworn to protect. Marcus could see the change in his recruits immediately. They stood differently now, with a deeper sense of purpose and a more mature appreciation for the complexity of their chosen profession. The nervous energy of new soldiers had been replaced by the focused determination of individuals who understood exactly what they were committing to and had chosen to embrace that commitment fully. Prince George took a step back from the formation and offered a formal salute, which the recruits returned with precision that surprised even Marcus. "Thank you for your continued service," the prince said. "I look forward to working with each of you as you complete your training and begin your careers as Royal Guards. Captain Williams, please proceed with the enhanced training protocols we discussed." As Prince George departed with his security detail, Marcus felt a profound sense of responsibility settling over him. These recruits were no longer just soldiers in training. They were young people who had just voluntarily accepted a level of personal risk and professional complexity that most people would find overwhelming. His job now was to ensure they had every tool and skill they would need to succeed in their challenging new roles. The recruits remained at attention until the prince was completely out of sight, then relaxed into a more informal gathering. Marcus could see them exchanging glances and subtle nods, the beginnings of the tight bonds that often developed among guards who had shared significant experiences together. This conversation with Prince George would become part of their shared history, something they would reference and remember throughout their careers. Thompson approached Marcus first, his expression serious but determined. "Captain, what can we expect from this enhanced training you and the prince mentioned? I want to make sure I'm prepared for whatever comes next." Marcus smiled at the young man's directness. "The enhanced training will cover situational awareness, counter-surveillance techniques, and communication protocols for reporting suspicious contacts. You'll also spend time with experienced guards who can share practical insights about maintaining personal security while living a normal life. It's challenging material, but nothing you can't handle if you stay focused and take it seriously." Jenkins joined the conversation, followed by Rodriguez and several other recruits. "Captain," she said, "I have to admit, when I woke up this morning, I thought the biggest challenge of the day would be getting through weapons training without embarrassing myself. This has been something else entirely." "That's royal service," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "One day you're practicing ceremonial drills, the next day you're learning about international security threats. The key is staying flexible and remembering that every challenge is an opportunity to become better at protecting the people who depend on us." Rodriguez looked thoughtful as he considered Marcus's words. "Sir, do you think we'll actually encounter the kinds of approaches Prince George described? Or was this more about preparing us for possibilities that might never happen?" It was a smart question, and Marcus appreciated that Rodriguez was thinking beyond the immediate drama of the morning's revelations. "In my experience," Marcus said carefully, "Royal Guards who are properly trained and aware of these risks rarely become targets for serious compromise attempts. The people who try to infiltrate royal security prefer to target guards who don't know what to watch for. By making you aware of these tactics, Prince George has actually made you much safer." As the conversation continued, Marcus watched his recruits with growing confidence. They were asking the right questions, supporting each other through their concerns, and demonstrating the kind of professional maturity that suggested they would indeed become excellent Royal Guards. The morning's events had been challenging, but they had also revealed character and commitment that no amount of routine training could have tested. The rest of the day proceeded with modified training, exercises that incorporated some of the security awareness elements they would need to master. Marcus watched as his recruits adapted to new challenges with the same determination they had shown in responding to Prince George's difficult truths. By evening, he was convinced that this group would not only survive their enhanced training, but would emerge as one of the strongest classes of Royal Guards he had ever had the privilege to train. The sun set over the palace grounds and the recruits departed for their quarters. Marcus remained in the courtyard for a few extra minutes, reflecting on the day's events. Prince George's decision to speak directly and honestly with the new guards had been risky, but it had also been exactly the right thing to do. These young people deserved to know what they were facing, and they had proven themselves worthy of that trust. By rising to meet the challenge with courage and integrity, that would serve them well throughout their careers in royal service.